In Thailand we can find elephant references pretty much everywhere. The old flag of Siam used to be a white elephant with a red background, and there's even a beer called Chiang, which is the Thai word for elephant. So elephants are one of the symbols of Thailand. They were celebrated due to their strength and longevity, and they're also a sign of status, power and wealth for the kings. There is also significance in the Thai Buddhism culture. One example is the Ganesh god that was incorporated from Hinduism, thus the elephant being one of the sacred animals. Despite of their cultural significance and having a closer relationship with Thai people, these animals now need to be rescued and live in animal sanctuaries. And that's because they've been exploited for tourism. This exploitative relationship between man and elephant didn't start with tourism. Back in the day, they used to help building temples, clear forests, transportation, and they were even used in wars. One example is the famous elephant wars between Thailand and Burma, where kings used to ride them in battle. And they continued to be used as machinery for the logging industry until 1989, when it was banned. Ironically, elephants were being used to destroy their own habitat. According to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, when logging was banned, only 28% of Thailand's forests remain, compared to 90% in the beginning of the century. This habitat loss and fragmentation of the remaining forests are one of the biggest threats for the survival of the Asian elephant. So the ban of commercial logging left many of the elephant owners without income or resources to feed their elephants. See, owning an elephant is not cheap. They need around 250 kilograms of food per day, which is very expensive. It is even said that back in the day, kings used to gift white elephants to their enemies, because the care of the elephant that can't work would lead to bankruptcy. Therefore, the tourism industry was considered a good alternative to provide for the now unemployed elephants, for their owners and their families, and this included rides, trekking, circus. However, after 30 years, most of these animals are either very old and unable to work or have died. And the main motivator to keep the industry running is the profits these companies are able to make by exploiting an endangered species. But you may be asking, if the Asian elephant is considered to be an endangered species, isn't there legislation to protect it? The answer is yes, but it's not that simple. Elephants in Thailand are covered by two kinds of protection laws. The ones in the wild are protected by the Wildlife Protection Law. However, the ones taken from the wild, bred and kept in captivity are covered under the domestic livestock legislation, which allows them to be treated as private property. The numbers show that, as tourism continued to boom in the last decade in Thailand, the number of elephants kept in captivity also grew to meet the strong demand for elephant entertainment. And the prevalence of riding just perpetuates the industry and this snowball, which means that more baby elephants will be captured and bred for a life in captivity. Elephants should be allowed to live as naturally as possible. Fortunately, since the 90s, there have been organizations like elephant sanctuaries that rescue these elephants and try to provide them with a better life. While we were in Chiang Mai, we visited one of them, the Elephant Nature Park, and we had a great time and a great experience, and we also learned a lot about this problem. We spent a full day there, and in the first part of our visit we helped their staff and volunteers feeding some elephants. After lunch, we had a tour through the park to see the facilities and of course see more elephants, and also know their stories. All the elephants in the park were rescued from abusive situations from all over Thailand. Lek Chaler, the founder, and their staff rely on intel from local villagers and then try to purchase them from the owners. From memory, more than 70 elephants had already been rescued and sent to the park for rehab, and are now living a more natural life in the 100 hectares of land they have. Almost all of the rescued elephants had scars from their past lives, and from those scars you can have a glimpse of how those lives actually were. Some had scars from chains, their ears cut off. One of them had his leg permanently injured because it was broken once and never properly treated. Some of them developed PTSD, and because they were still quite aggressive, had to be separate from the herd for safety. Riding an elephant is unethical, as well as any other form of forcing them to display any unnatural behavior for the benefit of tourists. Yet the problem is way deeper than this. For starters, for elephants to perform those tricks, let anyone ride them, or even to obey their keeper, they have to undergo a cruel process known as crushing their spirits, which is when the keeper establishes dominance over the elephant by, say, keeping them at tiny paces, with their legs side up and without being able to move, screamed at, depriving them from food or water, beating them with sharp objects like bull hooks, and this can last weeks. And by the end of it, the elephant is in such state of fear of their keeper that they'll just comply with them. We actually saw something similar to this a few days after visiting the camp. We were down in Ayutthaya, which used to be the old capital of Thailand, and there was this guy with a baby elephant accepting money from tourists. Someone just gave him some money, and so that the baby elephant would just stand on his back legs, the guy had to stab him with a bullhook, and the elephant was just like trying to stand, and at the same time he was just screaming with this agonizing pain sound. Yeah, it was such a terrible thing to see. And actually in Ayutthaya, it was the only place we've been that we saw someone riding elephants. Families riding elephants with their children, great parenting. Yeah, a wild elephant will never let anyone ride them. On the other hand, even after this cruel training process, elephants are kept in extremely poor welfare conditions during their lifetime in captivity. This range from being restrained all the time, with exception when they're being used for rides, permanent saddling, inadequate shelter, limited social interactions with other elephants. Studies say that elephants submitted to these kinds of conditions may have shorter lifespans, lower reproductive rates, behavioral problems, and develop chronic physical and psychological diseases. A study made by the World Animal Protection in 2020 investigated around 3,000 elephants in tourism venues all over Thailand, but also in countries like Sri Lanka, Laos and Cambodia. It found that 63% of them were living in severely inadequate conditions. This study also showed that Thailand uses twice as many elephants in tourism when compared to the other countries combined. The study also found that in Thailand, between 2010 and 2020, there was a 70% rise in the number of elephants in tourism venues, and that 70% of these elephants were living in severely inadequate conditions. The number of venues grew by 134%, but on a positive note, there are also more elephants in venues with higher welfare scores, such as the one we visited. Visits on Elephant Nature Park are based on observation and interaction that is initiated by the elephant. They have continuously been improving as an ecotourism organization from a standpoint where they needed to grow economically in order to rescue and provide for the elephants. But when we were there in 2018, they already had phased out baiting with elephants and visitors were only able to observe. It was very rewarding to find elephants that were well cared. They were not only healthy, but also very social between them. There was even a blind elephant that was taken care of by another member of the herd. The visit continued, and of course, the most popular moment was watching the elephants bathing in the afternoon. It was both funny and emotional. Even though there is still a lot of demand for elephant rides, there is a small shift in the industry towards more ethical companies and tourists finding elephant riding to be unethical. However, this doesn't necessarily mean a shift in the whole industry. With the rise of tourists wanting more ethical experiences, more and more elephant sanctuaries started to appear. But a lot of this just mean market adjustments and not necessarily better conditions for the elephants. Before we booked our tour on Elephant Nature Park, we did a lot of research in the Chiang area online, and we still find a lot of reviews reporting a natural behavior. So it's very important for you to do your research, but also to leave reviews on those abusive situations and also on the good ones. According to the World Animal Foundation, a true elephant-friendly venue would be purely observational for the safety of both the animals and the visitors. So as a general rule, avoid any venues offering rides or bathing sessions, which is becoming increasingly more popular. Elephants don't need anyone to watch them. For a successful phase-out of the elephant entertainment industry, a decrease in the demand for rides must obviously occur, but also in combination with more support towards friendly venues. In theory, this will grant more conditions and better conditions for the elephants currently in captivity that otherwise wouldn't survive in the wild. But there's already a small shift happening. For instance, we're already seeing companies like TripAdvisor banning the worst elephant venues, and we also see some great and progressive projects happening in Thailand. But this was when there was tourism. You may be wondering what happened in 2020 with COVID. In Thailand, the country with the highest number of captive elephants, animals were regularly abandoned, which kind of highlighted the risks of over-dependency on tourism. In March 2020, when the pandemic hit, a lot of these venues had to shut down, and consequently the staff, the elephants, had to be laid off. What followed was a big migration. You know, a lot of these elephants were being leased from their traditional owners who still lived in the native villages. So there have been reports of dozens of elephants walking thousands of kilometers for days with their owners to go back to these villages, often also their birthplaces. What they found was that their habitat had now been converted into farmland, and there wasn't enough forest for them to live freely. Consequently, there were concerns that their new lives wouldn't be better than the lives they had in the camps. Starvation was also another main concern. However, widespread starvation did not happen due to communities coming together to ensure elephants were fed. Besides some contributions from the government, the Save the Elephant Foundation organized food banks and established partnerships with farmers. To date, this initiative supported 360 camps and fed around 2,000 elephants. In some of the more remote villages where intact forests still exist, elephants had the chance to merge with their natural habitat. There, some Karen communities that live near the border with Myanmar employ practices that allow them some freedom to graze and forage. The Save the Elephant Foundation is working alongside other nonprofits to maximize these chances. And to date, they have helped the owners of 218 elephants to generate income and care for the elephants close to the forest. The goal is that these elephants don't have to go back to the tourism industry once the pandemic is over. And perhaps, thanks to this pandemic, there will be a great shift for the life of elephants in Thailand. Hopefully that is the case. So if you reached the end of this video, thanks a lot for watching. If you're interested, I'll link the main study we mentioned in the description below. It's very comprehensive and interesting, so it's a great read. I'll also link up the website for Elephant Nature Park because they're always needing contributions and volunteers. See you next week.